Welcome to our deep dive, I guess, into the February 2025 USA Fencing Board meeting. As you know, I host the Fencing Family Podcast, so I'm really interested in this. And, I think a lot of our listeners are going to be too, especially with everything that happened this past year with the Y8 format. We're going to be looking at two different sources today, both from the USA Fencing official website. One's a general recap of the meeting, and then the other one is a statement specifically from Board Chair Damian Leyfelt. We'll be covering a bunch of interesting stuff like a brand new award for lifetime achievement in fencing, plus updates on international relations, and then, of course, that Y8 format that everybody's been talking about.
Yeah, let's start with the Y8 format. So back in July 2024, USA Fencing rolled out this format that required everybody to use a number 0 blade, which is lighter and shorter than the standard number 2 blade that older fencers typically use. The idea was to try to even the playing field for younger fencers. But a lot of coaches and parents were concerned that this was just developmentally inappropriate for 8-year-olds and might even, discourage them from participating.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like the board got that message loud and clear. They've said that they messed up by not talking to coaches and parents before they made the change. And actually, the tournament committee and the coaches committee worked together to come up with a revised Y8 format, which is really great to see.
Absolutely. This new format's a lot more flexible. With the blade, you can use the number 0 blade, but fencers can also use a number 2 blade if they and their coaches think they're ready for it. Local organizers also have more freedom now to decide on strip length and even what the whole tournament format looks like for Y8. And maybe the biggest change is that Y8 won't have a national championship or be used to calculate ranking points.
That's a really big change. It seems like they really want to make sure that young fencers have a good experience when they're just starting out, and that they focus on developing their skills at their own pace, rather than worrying about competing at such a high level right away. But what does this mean for youth fencing going forward? I mean, some people say that getting rid of the national rankings might actually make it harder for really talented kids to develop, while others think that it'll get more kids involved in fencing and create a bigger pool of skilled fencers. It'll be really interesting to see how this all plays out over the next few years.
Switching gears a little bit, let's talk about international relations. Things got a little tense there for a minute. The Canadian Fencing Federation was thinking about boycotting USA fencing tournaments, but luckily they were able to talk it out. USA Fencing and the Canadian Fencing Federation leadership had some good conversations and decided that they're going to stay friends. Canadian fencers will still fence in USA fencing tournaments and vice versa.
That's good to hear. A boycott would have been bad for both countries, especially since the U.S. and Canada have such a long history of fencing together and being friendly rivals. This actually leads into another interesting point from the meeting. The board made it clear that they are committed to welcoming athletes from all 23 North American countries.
Right. It's a really strong statement about how important it is for USA fencing to be inclusive. It's a reminder that sports can bring people from different countries together and create friendships, even when there might be political disagreements between those countries. Of course, we'll have to see how this commitment actually plays out in practice. What are they actually going to do to support international athletes who want to compete in the U.S.?
Let's move on to something that caused a lot of debate at the meeting. A proposal to create a national anthem policy. The idea was to make sure that the anthem was played the same way at every tournament. But it turned out that this is a really complicated issue with a lot of different factors to think about. In the end, the board decided to hand it over to the tournament committee to study it more.
That was probably a good call. Figuring out a national anthem policy means thinking about tradition, but also all the different logistics. You want to make sure that everyone feels respected, but you also have to think about what makes sense for the athletes, the coaches, and all the people watching the tournament. It's not an easy decision, and the tournament committee is going to need to talk to a lot of different people to come up with a policy that works for everybody.
Speaking of tradition, let's talk about something really cool that happened at the meeting. They created a brand new award called the Member of Honor Award. It's to honor people who have done amazing things for USA fencing throughout their careers. And the first person to get this award is Donald Alperstein. He has an incredible resume. He was president of USA Fencing Legal Counsel and FIE representative.
And that's just the beginning. He's been volunteering, mentoring, and advocating for fencing for decades. So this award is a really well-deserved recognition of all that he's done. It also sets a high standard for anyone who wins the award in the future and shows how important it is to volunteer and dedicate your time to the sport.
It's awesome to see someone who's given so much to fencing get the recognition he deserves. Not every idea at the meeting was a slam dunk, though. There were a few that people weren't so sure about. Let's start with the DEIB office.
Right. Someone suggested that they get rid of the DEIB office, which stands for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. But the board decided not to do that. They want to keep supporting DEIB.
That's a big deal. The DEIB office has been doing a lot of work to make fencing more welcoming and fair for everybody. So the fact that the board decided to keep it, even though some people wanted to get rid of it, shows that they're serious about DEIB. But of course, it's not enough to just have the office. They need to actually do things to make fencing more diverse, equitable, and inclusive.
That brings up a really important question. What is USA Fencing going to do to keep making progress on DEIB? Are they going to try to get more people of color and from different backgrounds involved as athletes, coaches, and officials? How will they know if their programs are actually working and making a difference for everybody in fencing?
These are questions that we need to keep asking, and we need to see USA Fencing actually taking action. It's great that they say they care about DEIB, but what really matters is what they do. Okay, let's move on to another proposal that people weren't so happy about. This one was about the Coaches Committee, which is the group that represents all the fencing coaches in the country.
The idea was to change how the coaches committee is structured, but the board decided not to do that right now. The committee is pretty new, and the board wants to give them some time to figure things out before they start making big changes.
That makes sense. Sometimes it's better to wait and see how things are working before you try to change them, especially when you're dealing with a group that's so important to how coaches and athletes develop.
Exactly. But this decision also makes you wonder, how will the coaches committee make sure that they're listening to all the different coaches in the country? Will they talk to coaches who work with different levels of fencers and who teach different weapons?
These are good points. Any group that's supposed to represent a lot of different people needs to make sure they're actually listening to everyone they're supposed to represent. We'll have to pay attention to how the coaches committee does its job in the next few months and years.
Now let's talk about something a little more technical, but still important. Informal resolution procedures for minor infractions. The board approved some updates to these procedures to make them easier to understand and use.
That sounds like a good thing. Making these procedures easier to use should help resolve small problems faster and more fairly. And that means that USA Fencing can focus on bigger, more serious issues.
Exactly. Making things simpler can make a big difference, both for the people involved and for USA Fencing as a whole.
Before we get too far into talking about what all these decisions might mean for fencing, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsor. You don't have to limit your love of fencing to just when you're on the strip. You can show it off in your everyday life, too. And that's where Fencing Family comes in.
Fencing Family is a really cool Etsy shop that's based right here in Los Angeles. They have a bunch of awesome fencing-themed clothes and accessories that are perfect for fencers of all ages.
Whether you're looking for a comfy t-shirt to wear to practice or something stylish to show off your love of fencing when you're not at the club, Fencing Family has got you covered. Their stuff is both comfortable and stylish, so you can show off your fencing pride all year round on and off the strip.
And let's be real, who doesn't love some cool fencing gear? I know I do.
You can see all their stuff and find the perfect thing to express your fencing spirit by going to their website at fencingfamily.etsy.com. Okay, let's get back to our deep dive. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to what these decisions mean for the future of fencing in the U.S.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what we're going to be exploring in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned as we go deeper into what these decisions could mean for fencers like you. So it seems like the board's trying to, find a balance between listening to what people want, like with the Y8 format, and also making sure that USA Fencing is moving in the right direction for the future.
Yeah, the YA thing really showed how hard that can be. The board had to admit that they made a mistake, but they also had to make sure that any changes they made were still good for young fencers.
Exactly. It wasn't about just, making a few people happy. They had to think about all the young fencers, from the ones just starting out to the ones who might become really competitive. That's why the new format is so flexible. It lets the people who run the tournaments decide what works best for their fencers so that everyone has a good experience and can learn at their own pace.
I wonder how that's going to work in real life. Will we see different kinds of Y8 tournaments in different parts of the country? Will some places use shorter strips or let kids choose whether they want to use the number 0 blade, while other places do things the old way?
It'll be interesting to see for sure. And USA Fencing really needs to pay attention to what happens. They need to keep track of how many kids are participating, how well they're doing, and what coaches and parents are saying, so they can really understand if these changes are working.
And more importantly, they need to be ready to change things again if they need to. This shouldn't be like a one-time thing. They should keep checking to see if it's working and make it better.
You're right. They have to be flexible and be willing to listen to feedback, That's really important for any organization, especially in a sport like fencing where things are always changing. Remember that whole thing with the Canadian Fencing Federation?
Yeah.
That could have turned into a huge mess.
Yeah, it's a good thing that they were able to work things out. It shows how important it is to have good relationships and to be able to talk things through. And speaking of supporting fencing, I think it's time to give another shout out to our sponsor, Fencing Family.
For sure. They're doing something really cool with their fencing clothes and accessories. It's a fun and stylish way to show that you love fencing, whether you're at the club or not.
Their designs are so comfortable, and they have everything from everyday clothes to special pieces that really show off your fencing pride. It's the perfect way to represent our sport everywhere we go.
If you haven't checked them out yet, you should go to their Etsy shop at fencingfamily.etsy.com/XO. I bet you'll find something you like.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into this board meeting, I keep coming back to this one question.
What's that?
I mean, are they really changing how they do things at USA Fencing? Are they actually going to be more transparent and work more closely with people and listen to what fencers need? Or is this just a bunch of talk?
That's the big question, isn't it? We'll have to wait and see what they actually do. I mean, they say all the right things, but what matters is if they actually follow through.
They've done some good things like the new Y8 format and saying
Yeah.
that they want to be more inclusive and creating that Member of Honor award. But those are just first steps.
Yeah, the hard part is actually doing it. Are they really going to collect data and listen to feedback and make changes if things aren't working? Are they going to actually try to get input from different people in fencing and really listen to what they have to say? Will they actually do something about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or are they just going to say they care?
We need to keep asking those questions. And we need to keep asking USA Fencing those questions too. It's up to us as fencers to stay informed and involved and make sure that they're doing what they said they would do.
And that makes me think about something I want to leave you with. If you could change one thing about USA Fencing, what would it be? What could they do to make fencing better for you, for everyone you fence with, and for all the new fencers coming up?
Think about that for a minute and then do something about it. Talk about it.
Yeah.
Get involved with your club. Speak up. The future of fencing depends on all of us.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive into the February 2025 USA Fencing Board meeting. Until next time, keep practicing and stay sharp.